You were fine 10 seconds ago. Then your phone vibrates. A message appears on the screen, short, cold, disrespectful enough to change your entire mood before your mind even understands why. Your jaw tightens, your chest gets heavy, and now, instead of living your day, you are mentally arguing with someone who may not even be thinking about you anymore. This is how most people lose their peace. Not through tragedy, through tiny emotional reactions repeated every day. A rude comment, a dismissive tone, being ignored, being misunderstood, someone cutting you off in traffic, someone speaking to you like you are beneath them. Small moments, massive emotional consequences. And the disturbing part is this. Many people think anger means strength, but usually uncontrolled anger means somebody else has gained temporary control over your nervous system. The Stoics understood something most people never learn. If another person can easily control your emotions, they are controlling part of your life, not permanently, but long enough to drain your energy, cloud your judgment, and steal your presence. And this keeps happening because most people never pause long enough to notice the mechanism. They react first, then justify the reaction afterward. That is why they stay trapped, not because they are weak, because they are unconscious in the moment that matters. So this video is not about becoming emotionless. It is not about pretending nothing affects you. It is about learning how to stop giving every difficult person access to your inner state. How to stay calm without becoming passive. How to protect your mind without hardening your heart. And how to become someone who cannot be emotionally pulled around by every careless word, opinion, or provocation. Because peace is not found. It is trained, and if you recognize this pattern in yourself, leave a like as a quiet commitment to stop surrendering your peace to temporary emotions and temporary people. Now let's begin with the first truth most people misunderstand about anger. Most people think anger makes them powerful, but look carefully at what actually happens when you lose control. Your breathing changes, your voice changes, your decisions change. Your entire nervous system begins obeying somebody else's behavior, and yet we still call that strength. A man says one disrespectful thing to you, and now he controls your mood for the next 3 hours. A coworker dismisses your effort, and suddenly your whole evening feels poisoned. Someone criticizes you online, and now your mind keeps returning to a person you would never willingly invite into your home. This is the contradiction. People believe anger gives them control. But uncontrolled anger is often surrender disguised as power. The Stoics saw this clearly. A reactive person is easy to manipulate because their emotional buttons are exposed to the world. Anyone can press them, and once someone can predict your reactions, they can influence your behavior without ever touching you physically. That is why emotionally reactive people are constantly exhausted. Their inner state depends too heavily on external conditions. Respectful people, calm. Rude people, angry. Good day, stable. Bad day, destructive. They are emotionally outsourced. And eventually, this becomes identity. I'm just hot-tempered. I've always been like this. No one disrespects me. But underneath many angry reactions is something much less powerful. A desperate need to regain emotional control after feeling internally threatened. The problem is that reacting immediately almost never restores dignity. Usually, it destroys more of it, because the moment you lose command of yourself, the situation is already controlling you. So, here is the first practice. Simple, but difficult. The next time somebody triggers you, pause and ask yourself one question before reacting. Am I choosing this response, or am I being pulled into it? That small pause changes everything. Because awareness breaks automatic behavior, and most anger survives only when it stays automatic. But there is something even deeper happening underneath these reactions, something most people never notice. Very often, the present moment is not the real wound at all. Most anger is older than the moment that triggered it. That is why small situations sometimes create reactions that feel strangely intense. Someone interrupts you, someone ignores your message, someone speaks with a dismissive tone, and suddenly the emotional response is much bigger than the situation itself. Why? Because the present moment touched an older wound. Many people are not reacting only to what is happening now. They are reacting to what this moment reminds them of. Disrespect, rejection, humiliation, being overlooked, feeling powerless, feeling unimportant. A man hears criticism from his partner, but internally he feels like a failure again. A woman gets ignored in a meeting, but internally she feels invisible again. Someone receives a rude comment, but what they really feel is the old fear of not being valued. This is why anger can feel immediate and overwhelming. The nervous system is not only reacting to reality, it is reacting to memory. And when people do not understand this, they keep fighting the wrong battle. They think the solution is controlling everybody around them, winning arguments, dominating conversations, forcing respect. But even if the world became quieter, the unresolved wound would still remain inside them, waiting for another trigger. This is why some people explode over tiny things. The present moment is only the spark. The emotional history behind it is the fuel. And this realization changes everything, because now the goal is no longer, how do I stop people from upsetting me? The real question becomes, what exactly feels threatened inside me when this happens? That question requires honesty, not performance, not ego, honesty. Maybe your anger comes from the fear of being dismissed. Maybe it comes from needing validation. Maybe you built your identity around always being respected, always being understood, always being seen as competent. And the moment reality challenges that image, anger rushes in to defend it. But here is the dangerous part. People who never examine their emotional wounds become prisoners of invisible triggers. Their entire behavior can be controlled by unresolved pain. They barely understand themselves. So the next time anger appears, do not ask only, why am I angry? Ask something deeper. What does this situation make me feel I am losing? Respect? Control? Importance? Security? That answer matters more than the argument itself. Because when you identify the real wound, you stop fighting shadows. And once you stop reacting automatically to every emotional bruise, something unexpected begins to happen. Silence no longer feels like weakness. It starts feeling like control. Most people react immediately because silence feels unbearable to them. They think if they do not respond instantly, they lose respect, lose status, lose power. So they rush to defend themselves before they even understand what truly deserves a response. But calm people understand something reactive people do not. Not every attack deserves emotional participation, and not every disrespect deserves immediate access to your energy. The Stoics never taught emotional suppression. They taught separation, the separation between impulse and action, between feeling anger and obeying it. That difference is everything, because the first emotion is often automatic, but the second step is choice. And many people never reach that second step. They feel something and instantly become it. Anger appears, they become angry. Insult appears, they become defensive. Conflict appears, they become chaos. There is no space between stimulus and identity. That is why silence becomes so powerful. Not because silence magically solves problems, but because silence creates space, and space gives you back your ability to choose. Imagine two men in the same argument. The first reacts immediately, raises his voice, interrupts, tries to win. By the end of the conversation, he feels drained, ashamed, and emotionally scattered. The second man pauses, not to manipulate, not to appear superior, but to remain conscious. He listens carefully. He notices his emotional reaction without instantly obeying it. And because he delays reaction, he sees the situation more clearly than the other person. That clarity becomes power. This is why emotionally mature people often appear calmer during conflict, not because they feel nothing, because they refuse to abandon themselves emotionally in the middle of pressure. And here is an important distinction. Silence is not weakness when it is chosen consciously. Sometimes silence is restraint. Sometimes it is observation. Sometimes it is dignity, refusing to perform emotional chaos for an audience. Many arguments survive only because two nervous systems keep feeding each other. One reaction creates another, then another, then another, until nobody even remembers what the original issue was. So here is a practice you can begin immediately. Before responding during conflict, pause long enough to ask, am I trying to solve something, or am I trying to protect my ego from discomfort? That single question interrupts countless unnecessary reactions. Because many people are not defending truth, they are defending identity, and once you learn how to pause without feeling weak, you begin noticing something else. Anger does not start in the mind first. Very often, it starts in the body. Most people notice anger too late. They notice it after the argument, after the damage, after the message they regret sending. But anger usually announces itself long before words come out of your mouth. The body speaks first. Your jaw tightens. Your shoulders rise. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your chest feels hot. Your hands become tense. Your face hardens. The nervous system begins preparing for conflict before the conscious mind fully explains what is happening. And if you miss these early signals, the reaction becomes much harder to control later. This is why emotional mastery is not only philosophical, it is physical. A person who cannot calm the body will struggle to calm the mind, because the mind often follows the state of the body already in motion. Think about how quickly people escalate emotionally online. A single comment, a single sentence, and suddenly they are typing with adrenaline instead of awareness. Not because the situation truly threatens survival, but because the nervous system interprets emotional threat as physical danger. Disrespect feels dangerous to the ego, rejection feels dangerous to identity, and the body reacts accordingly. This is where most people lose themselves. They become completely fused with the emotional wave, but Stoic discipline begins with interruption, not suppression. Interruption. The moment you notice physical tension, do something simple and deliberate. Relax your jaw, lower your shoulders, slow your exhale, not dramatically, quietly, almost invisibly. Because when you slow the body, you create friction against impulsive behavior, and that friction matters. A calm body makes conscious thinking easier. An agitated body makes emotional reactions feel justified. This is why some people say terrible things they do not even fully mean during anger. Their nervous system temporarily hijacks their judgment. Then, afterward, comes guilt, embarrassment, exhaustion, and the strange realization that one emotional moment controlled an entire day. So, start paying attention earlier, not to your words first, to your body first. Because emotional control rarely begins at the level of speech. It begins at the level of tension. And once you learn to interrupt anger physically before it fully forms mentally, you discover something even more important. Most people are carrying themselves through life as if strangers deserve permanent access to their inner world, as if anyone can walk in emotionally whenever they want. And that has to change. Most people walk through life handing out emotional control without realizing it. A stranger gets access. A rude customer gets access. A toxic relative gets access. Someone having a bad day gets access. And suddenly, your inner state belongs to whoever disturbed you last. It is like giving strangers a remote control to your nervous system. One button changes your mood. Another changes your tone. Another changes your peace. And the worst part is that many people call this normal. But think carefully about what this means. Someone says a few careless words, and now they control your thoughts for hours. Someone disrespects you once, and now they live in your head all night. Someone misunderstands you, and now your entire emotional state collapses, trying to correct their opinion. That is too much power to hand another human being, especially people who may not even have control over themselves. This does not mean you become emotionally numb. It means you stop allowing temporary people to create permanent emotional occupation inside your mind. The Stoics believed something deeply practical. You cannot always control events, but you can decide how much authority those events receive inside you. That distinction changes everything, because many people unconsciously believe, if something affects me emotionally, the situation must be important. Not true. Some things affect you strongly simply because your nervous system is untrained. That is why emotional discipline matters. Without it, every irritation feels personal, every disagreement feels threatening, every difficult interaction feels like a battle for identity, and eventually, life becomes exhausting. Not because reality is impossible, because reactivity consumes enormous energy. So, here is a simple shift that can immediately reduce unnecessary anger. When somebody triggers you, mentally separate two things: their behavior, your reaction. Their behavior belongs to them. Your reaction belongs to you. That sentence sounds simple, but practiced consistently, it becomes freedom. Because the moment you fully own your reaction, you stop blaming the world for emotions you never learned to regulate. And strangely enough, this ownership creates more peace, not less. You stop chasing emotional control through other people. You stop needing everyone to behave correctly before you can feel stable. You become harder to emotionally manipulate because your inner state is no longer fully dependent on external behavior. And this is where many people experience a major shift for the first time. They realize something uncomfortable. Humiliation is not always created by the event itself. Very often, it is created by the meaning we attach to it afterward. One of the biggest reasons people stay angry is because they confuse discomfort with destruction. Someone criticizes them, and internally it feels like their value has been reduced. Someone rejects them, and it feels like they have become less worthy. Someone speaks disrespectfully, and suddenly they feel humiliated before they even stop to examine what actually happened. But the Stoics constantly return to one powerful idea: other people can insult you, they can misunderstand you, they can behave unfairly, but they cannot define your character without your cooperation. This is where emotional suffering often becomes self-created, not at the moment of the event, but in the interpretation afterward. A man hears criticism at work. The fact is simple: someone questioned my performance. But then, the mind adds layers. They think I'm incompetent. I'm losing respect. I'll never be valued. I always get overlooked. And now the emotional pain becomes much larger than the original event itself. The same thing happens in relationships. A delayed reply becomes, I'm being ignored. A disagreement becomes, I'm not loved. A rude tone becomes, nobody respects me. The mind builds emotional fiction faster than most people realize. And once they believe the story, anger feels justified. This is why emotionally reactive people often suffer twice. First, from the event. Then, from the interpretation they keep feeding afterward. But calm people learn to separate three things very carefully: what happened, what they assumed, what they choose next. That separation creates enormous emotional freedom, because not every thought deserves belief, and not every emotional reaction deserves obedience. This does not mean becoming naive. Some people are disrespectful. Some people are manipulative. Some situations genuinely require boundaries. But suffering increases dramatically when the mind keeps turning every difficult moment into a statement about personal worth. So here is a powerful exercise. The next time something upsets you, divide the situation into 3 parts: fact, interpretation, response. For example, fact: they interrupted me 3 times. Interpretation: they think I'm insignificant. Response: I can calmly address this without losing control. This exercise sounds small, but it retrains the mind to stop emotionally collapsing into automatic meaning-making. Because once you realize that much of anger comes from interpretation, not just reality, you stop treating every emotional reaction like absolute truth. And when that happens, something surprising becomes possible. You can protect your peace without becoming passive. You can stay calm and still have boundaries. Many people think being calm means becoming weak, so they choose aggression instead. Loud voices, sharp reactions, constant defensiveness, because internally they believe anger protects them from being ignored. But real emotional control is not the absence of boundaries. It is the ability to enforce boundaries without losing yourself emotionally in the process. This is where many people completely misunderstand Stoicism. Stoicism is not passive surrender, it is disciplined response. There is a difference. Passive people tolerate everything because they fear conflict. Reactive people create conflict because they fear losing control. But emotionally mature people do something different. They stay grounded while still protecting their standards. That balance is rare, because most people only know 2 modes: explode, or stay silent while resentment grows internally. Neither is healthy. Imagine someone speaking disrespectfully to you in public. A reactive person immediately escalates emotionally. A passive person says nothing but replays the humiliation for hours afterward. But a grounded person stays composed and responds clearly, not emotionally. Clearly. That clarity changes the entire interaction, because calm communication often carries more authority than emotional intensity ever will. People trust controlled energy. They become uncomfortable around chaotic energy. This is why the strongest presence in the room is often not the loudest person. It is the person who remains emotionally stable under pressure. And stability does not mean tolerating mistreatment forever. Sometimes the most stoic response is distance, ending the conversation, leaving the environment, reducing access, not with drama, not with revenge, just with self-respect. Here are 3 simple phrases that can protect your peace without unnecessary aggression. I'm not continuing this conversation like this. I'll respond when we can speak respectfully. That doesn't work for me. Short, clean, controlled. No emotional performance attached to them, because boundaries become more powerful when they are not fueled by emotional chaos, and this matters deeply. Many people secretly believe anger makes their boundaries stronger, but often anger weakens the message. Once emotion takes over, clarity disappears. And when clarity disappears, people stop hearing the principle and only react to the intensity. So stop thinking emotional explosions are proof of strength. Very often, they are proof that emotion has overridden discipline, and underneath many of those emotional explosions hides another uncomfortable truth most people avoid facing. They are addicted to being right. A surprising amount of anger comes from one hidden desire: the need to win emotionally, not physically, not practically, emotionally. Many people do not actually want peace during conflict. They want validation. They want the satisfaction of proving the other person wrong. They want the final word. They want the other person to finally understand how much damage they caused. And because of that, they stay mentally trapped inside arguments long after the conversation ends. They replay scenes in the shower, in bed, while driving, while trying to work. They keep editing imaginary speeches nobody will ever hear. Not because the situation still matters, because the ego still wants victory. This is one of the most exhausting emotional addictions a person can develop, the addiction to being right. And the dangerous part is that it often disguises itself as justice, but internally, many people are sacrificing peace for the emotional pleasure of self-confirmation. They are not protecting truth anymore, they are protecting identity. This is why some people cannot let small conflicts go. Being misunderstood feels unbearable to them. Not because misunderstanding destroys them, but because their self-worth has become dependent on external agreement. The Stoics warned against this constantly. If your peace depends on everybody understanding you correctly, you will never be peaceful for long. Because people project constantly, they misread intentions, they interpret through their own wounds, they hear selectively, and sometimes no explanation will fully satisfy them. That reality frustrates reactive people endlessly, but emotionally grounded people understand something liberating. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every accusation deserves defense. Not every opinion deserves emotional engagement. That does not mean you stop communicating. It means you stop emotionally chasing control over how every person sees you, because that chase never ends. And eventually, it turns life into constant psychological negotiation. So, ask yourself something honestly. Do you truly want peace? Or do you want the emotional satisfaction of proving somebody wrong? That question exposes a lot, because many arguments continue long after wisdom has already left the room. At that point, only ego remains. And ego is expensive. It drains energy, attention, sleep, presence, years of life. So begin choosing your conflicts more carefully. Not every battle deserves your nervous system. Not every difficult person deserves access to your emotional depth. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is quietly refuse participation. And once you stop treating every emotional trigger like a personal attack, you can begin building something most people never develop: a space between the emotion and the identity that follows it. Most people think emotional mastery means never feeling anger. That is impossible. The real goal is different. To stop turning every emotion into identity, because there is a dangerous moment that happens very quickly inside reactive people. They feel anger and instantly become an angry person. They feel disrespected and instantly become defensive. They feel criticized and instantly become hostile. There is no separation between experience and self. Everything fuses together immediately. But emotionally disciplined people create delay, a small space, a pause between the emotional wave and the action that follows it. That pause changes lives, because emotions are temporary states. Identity is what you repeatedly choose afterward. Imagine receiving a message that irritates you deeply. Most people react in seconds. They type emotionally, they send emotionally, and later, when the nervous system calms down, they regret giving a temporary emotion permanent consequences. This is why one simple habit can dramatically reduce unnecessary conflict. Delay your reactions, not forever, just long enough for awareness to return. If you are angry, do not send the message immediately. Write it, leave it, return later. You will often notice something strange. The version written during anger sounds different from the version written with clarity. The angry version wants emotional victory. The calm version wants resolution. That difference matters, because many people damage relationships, careers, and self-respect by acting from emotion immediacy instead of conscious intention. The Stoics trained themselves to observe emotions without instantly obeying them. Not because emotions are bad, because emotions without discipline become dangerous, especially when combined with pride. And this practice is not only for major conflicts, it applies everywhere. A rude comment, a stressful meeting, traffic, delays, disappointment. Tiny moments repeated daily shape emotional character over time. Every reaction is training, every pause is training, every conscious interruption weakens the old automatic pattern. This is why emotional control is less about dramatic transformation and more about repetition. Small, disciplined moments accumulated quietly, and eventually something powerful begins happening. You stop feeling emotionally dragged through life. You begin responding instead of reacting. You begin choosing instead of exploding. You begin protecting your peace without suppressing your humanity. But there is one final mistake many people make. They wait for huge conflicts to practice emotional control. That is backwards, because calm is built in small moments first. Most people wait for major conflict before trying to become emotionally disciplined. But by then, the nervous system is already overwhelmed. That is like trying to learn how to swim while drowning. Real emotional control is built in ordinary moments first, in traffic, in slow lines, in delayed replies, in small frustrations nobody else even notices, because those moments are training grounds. A person who cannot manage irritation in small situations will struggle during serious emotional pressure. The habit of reactivity does not suddenly disappear during major conflict. It becomes stronger. This is why Stoic practice was never meant to stay inside books. It was meant to exist in daily life. Every inconvenience becomes an opportunity to observe yourself. Not judge yourself, observe yourself. Notice how quickly impatience appears. Notice how badly the ego wants control. Notice how the mind creates emotional drama around tiny discomforts. Someone walks slowly in front of you. The internet stops working. A person answers coldly. Plans change unexpectedly. And immediately the mind says, "This is ruining my day." But is it really? Or is the nervous system simply addicted to resistance whenever reality stops obeying preference? That question matters, because many people are not exhausted by life itself. They are exhausted by constant internal friction against small, unwanted moments. So begin practicing calm in places that seem insignificant. When someone interrupts you, slow your breathing instead of rushing to dominate the conversation. When somebody speaks sharply, notice the emotional wave without immediately riding it. When frustration appears, stay aware of your body instead of becoming consumed by the story in your head. These are small exercises, but repeated daily, they reshape emotional character. And eventually you develop something rare: emotional endurance. The ability to remain internally stable even when circumstances are imperfect. Not because life became easier, because your reactions became more disciplined. Try this within the next 24 hours. Choose one predictable irritation in your life, just one, and decide beforehand that you will meet it differently. Not passively, not artificially calm, consciously. Maybe today your training is traffic. Maybe it is a difficult coworker. Maybe it is someone who never listens properly. Whatever it is, use the moment as practice instead of proof that the world is against you. Because every small victory over reactivity strengthens self-respect. And slowly, people begin noticing something different about you. Not intimidation, not coldness, stability. And true stability does not make you emotionally distant. It makes you emotionally trustworthy. Many people confuse calmness with emotional distance. They think becoming unbothered means becoming cold, detached, unable to care. But that is not emotional mastery. That is emotional shutdown. And the difference matters. A calm person still feels disappointment, still feels sadness, still feels frustration, still cares deeply about people. The difference is that they no longer collapse emotionally every time life becomes difficult. They can care without losing themselves. This is rare, because most people only know two extremes: overreact emotionally, or suppress everything until numbness replaces honesty. But Stoic discipline was never about becoming less human. It was about becoming less controlled by emotional chaos. Think about the people who bring the most stability into a room. Usually they are not the loudest, not the most aggressive, not the most emotionally dramatic. They are the people whose presence feels grounded, clear, steady. You trust them because they do not emotionally spill everywhere the moment pressure appears. That kind of calm creates safety in friendships, in relationships, in leadership, in family. Because emotionally reactive people often make everyone around them anxious. Nobody knows what version of them will appear, but emotionally grounded people create predictability, and predictability creates trust. This is why true calm is not weakness. It is emotional reliability. And, ironically, people who learn emotional control often become more compassionate, not less. Because once you stop fighting constant internal battles, you finally have energy available for understanding. You stop taking every mistake personally. You stop assuming every disagreement is an attack. You stop needing emotional victory in every conversation, and that creates space for wisdom. One of the strongest shifts a person can make is learning this. You can care about people without handing them authority over your nervous system. You can love someone without emotionally collapsing every time they disappoint you. You can help people without absorbing all their chaos. You can stay open-hearted without becoming emotionally fragile. That balance is maturity, not emotional hardness, not emotional dependence, balance. And once you begin developing that balance consistently, something powerful happens naturally. People stop being able to disturb you so easily, not because you became emotionally dead, because you finally became emotionally rooted. There is a version of you that no longer reacts to everything, not because life stopped being difficult, not because people suddenly became kinder, but because you finally learned something most people never do. Your mind does not have to open its doors to every disturbance that knocks. Most people spend years living emotionally exposed. Every opinion enters, every criticism enters, every rude interaction enters. And over time, they become mentally crowded by things that should have passed through them lightly. But emotionally grounded people live differently. They still notice disrespect. They still recognize manipulation. They still feel emotion. But they do not immediately surrender authority over themselves. That is the difference. They pause, they observe, they choose. And eventually this becomes identity, not forced calm. Not fake positivity, real stability, the kind built slowly through repeated moments of awareness. A person cuts them off in traffic. They breathe instead of exploding. Someone misunderstands them. They explain calmly or let it go instead of mentally fighting for hours. A difficult person tries to provoke them. They refuse emotional participation unless the situation truly deserves energy. This is not weakness. This is emotional selectivity, and emotionally selective people protect their peace far better than emotionally reactive people ever will, because they understand something simple. Attention is expensive, energy is expensive, inner peace is expensive, and not every situation deserves payment. The Stoics often reminded themselves that external events are temporary, but character is cumulative. Every reaction shapes the person you become repeatedly. Every pause strengthens discipline. Every conscious response strengthens self-respect. So if you truly want to become harder to anger, stop focusing only on controlling emotion. Focus on building a stronger relationship with awareness itself. Notice faster, pause earlier, interpret more carefully, respond more cleanly. Those small changes eventually create enormous emotional freedom, and one day you realize something surprising. The situations that once controlled you emotionally no longer have the same power. Not because the world changed, because you did. You stopped giving every difficult person a permanent seat inside your mind. You stopped treating every emotional trigger like an emergency. You stopped confusing intensity with strength. And in that space, a quieter kind of power appeared. The power of someone who remains internally steady while the world keeps trying to pull them into reaction. That is the man nobody can easily disturb, not emotionless, not passive, just deeply in command of himself. At the beginning of this video, we talked about how quickly a single moment can steal your peace. One message, one comment, one careless interaction, and suddenly your entire inner state changes. But now you can see the mechanism more clearly. Anger is not always strength. Very often, it is unconscious surrender, a temporary loss of inner authority. And the goal was never to become emotionless. The goal is to stop living at the mercy of every emotional trigger that crosses your path, to create space between stimulus and response, to stop giving strangers unrestricted access to your nervous system, to stay calm without becoming weak, to stay human without becoming emotionally chaotic. Because peace is not built in perfect conditions, it is built in ordinary moments where you consciously refuse to abandon yourself emotionally. The next time someone disrespects you, pause. The next time frustration rises in your body, notice it early. The next time your ego demands immediate reaction, ask whether the situation truly deserves your peace. These moments seem small, but your future character is being shaped inside them. One response at a time, one interruption at a time, one conscious decision at a time, and eventually, people notice something different about you. Not fear, not intimidation, presence. A kind of calm that cannot be easily manipulated. A kind of stability that does not collapse under pressure. That is real strength. So if this video helped you see anger differently, subscribe and continue this journey with me. And before you leave, write one thing in the comments. What situation in your life do you most want to stop reacting emotionally to? Because awareness is where change begins. And the moment you stop feeding every trigger with automatic emotion, you begin taking your life back.